Great. Thank you, Maureen. Okay, so everybody can see that now?
Yep.
Fabulous. All right. Okay, so here we go. Welcome and good morning, and thanks so much for being here. This presentation is called Why Are We Doing This Again? And it is meant to refresh our memories about where we are at this particular place and time in the world and history and future of Mayflower Church, reflecting on who we've been, who we are, and who we wish to become. So the point of today is to really ground our feet and get a chance to talk about some of the big picture, the context of how and why we find ourselves in this place and time. So Maureen, if you wouldn't mind going to the next slide. The thing we did when we were together last time was sort of ground ourselves in this compass. It's called the Courageous Conversations Compass. And it is meant to be a time for us just to reflect on where this question of Mayflower, the name Mayflower, our connections to this community of faith, where that lives in our body as we come to this place this morning. For many of us, when we think about the name Mayflower Church, that lives in our head. We approach it from kind of an intellectual space of history and time. Some of us approach it from a very relational sort of body place where it's, about action and movement. Some of us come from an emotional place or a heart place, which again has to do with the people that are here that we love. And some of us are coming from that very deep, soulful place about Mayflower as a spiritual community. So I just bring this in front of us this morning to give us a chance to kind of think about, again, where we are and how we are coming to this space. Maureen, if you want to go maybe 2 more down, there's that question. Go 1 more and the next one. There it is. So how are you entering the space today and what has motivated you to be here? Just take a minute to think about that, thinking about people who are watching this after the fact. Give yourself a minute to ground yourself. And I'll just sort of close this part by reminding us that we all are coming from different places, right? And some of us may feel like we're in all of those places. So as we continue to have conversations with one another and as a congregation, it will be important for us to be able to hear how other people are approaching these questions as well as how we are approaching them. So, all right, next one is our agenda. So here's what the committee and our brains kind of put together as a way for us to walk through this process so far. And we did the grounding. What I want to do next is look at some of that big picture context for us, which has to do with big things like the UCC denomination, as well as our own congregation. We will also think about what happened in our very neighborhood in 2024 with the murder of George Floyd and how that has created a worldwide time of reckoning, particularly around issues of racial justice that we jumped right in and are thinking about. Another big piece of this for us, I think, is our own vision and mission and strategic plan. So we'll think about those documents and what we have said we are about, and how all of that led then to the council creating this committee, What's in a Name committee. And then some of the work that our committee has done this past year and some of the learnings that we have had, some of them very recently, about other organizations and congregations who have gone through some similar questions, if not exactly the same, very similar. So I think that's kind of the big picture, but I'm happy to entertain any questions if there are things not on this agenda you want to make sure that we talk about. Feel free to unmute yourself and let me know. Okay, and feel free to, ask questions as we go. We'll do our best to answer them. All right, thank you, Maureen, so much for being my Vanna White today. Okay, first part is this incredible UCC denomination, and I will admit that I'm not a lifetime UCCer, as many of us are, I know, but a very impressive list of historical firsts, right? If we take a look at the screen, when it comes to being the first mainline Christian denomination to be out there in terms of social justice issues, the UCC has certainly been there. So here are just some examples: being the first to ordain a Black man, a woman, a gay man, a lesbian, to fight the inclusive language battle, and then marriage equality, right? And I'm sure there have been others since about particularly climate justice, I would think. So impressive list, and this informs sort of who Mayflower is as a UCC church. Maureen? So if you think about, and again, a lot of this is before my time, maybe it's before some of your time, what Mayflower has continued in terms of this social justice tradition. We, as a congregation, also had a big discussion and vote about using inclusive language. We had a big discussion and vote about becoming an open and affirming church. And we have sort of always been there to think through big racial and social justice events and issues, like the 500th anniversary of Christopher Columbus voyage. It's my understanding we had a special ceremony to acknowledge that although was at the time celebrated, for a long time celebrated, there was also quite a negative impact on Indigenous communities. And then it's my understanding too, we were, early on calling a person of color, a Japanese American, to be a pastor of the church. So those are just, again, some examples of the things that Mayflower Church specifically has done. And if I think about my short time at Mayflower and, the decade before that even, certainly Mayflower has this name and this reputation that is well regarded across not only our city, but the nation, in terms of all of the social justice work that we do. And this is just, a small collection of some of those groups that meet: Race Matters, Isaiah, Beacons, Immigration, Global Justice, the Creekside Program. Many of us have worked with the Minnesota legislature or the National UCC Conference. So we are an active group of people seeking to bring God's dream of justice to the world, and there is plenty of evidence to support that. And then perhaps even more recently, if I think about that list of teams, I think about how Mayflower does a great job of allowing each person to sort of seek their own path and figure out what their passions are and really work on those, which is amazing. In the past, maybe just 5-6 years, we also, though, I believe, have made a change within our congregation to look at things more systemically, right? To look across our organization, our institution, our congregation, and say, where do we see, again, issues of institutionalized racism and other isms that just kind of sit, with us all the time? And what are we going to do about those? And so even in just the last few years, we've taken those questions on in new ways that are congregation-wide, particularly with our small group ministry teams and particularly with our Lenten small groups. If you think about the work we did with Jody Farr's book, The Urgency of Awareness, if you were part of those Lenten conversations, that was, again, another big picture, an opportunity to think big picture about how each of us, in our worlds have both privileges and challenges that we're always dealing with. but that society has placed more weight, if you will, on certain groups of people that have become her language is normalized or dominant, right? So if we think about whether it's gender or race or language or physical ability, right? Some of us have more obstacles than others. So we're starting as a congregation to get a better sense of how all of that works in the world, and again, what our role is in addressing those issues, making the world a better place. So I am going to stop and just kind of let us breathe too. It's a lot of information we're throwing at you. So if at any time you're wondering something, feel free to jump in.
Kate, I'm going to jump in
Great.
quick. I don't see anything in here about our commitment to climate justice, our becoming an earthwise church.
Yeah,
I
that
feel
would
like that was
absolutely, yeah,
in
absolutely. That's there. Go ahead, because I'm less aware of those
the
things.
electrification resolution, and we've done obviously a lot of work with um, becoming more aware of the climate
Yeah,
crisis.
yeah.
And
Thank you.
I didn't know if that's not under global justice. That's different. So I'm just wondering why that's not on here.
Just because it wasn't in my brain either.
Oh,
So
okay.
thank you for bringing it up. Yeah. Yeah, and I know again, I think the National UCC and Mayflower in particular has been on the forefront of those issues as well, right? Climate justice and
Very much so.
ground-wise and earth-wise, very much so. Yeah. Thank you. I'll add those pieces in.
Okay,
I
great.
don't want
May
to
I
forget them.
also add one thing? I'm trying to remember the year, but with Marjorie Otto and Herb Perkins, that was his name. We did ASDIC circles. That was
Mm,
when Reverend Hannah
Brown.
Brown was a Lilly resident. So several groups at Mayflower did those deep ASDIC circles, which are the Race Matters group is sort of later than that, and that was an
mhm.
earlier iteration of that. Yeah.
Great.
Thank
And
you.
that would have been what, mid-90s?
I'm so bad with years, but that would be like 15 years ago, probably.
Okay, okay,
So I think you have the year right there.
2000.
It's just
Okay,
more the ASDIC
Mid-90s would be
circles.
30 years
2009.
ago.
Yeah. Great. No, thank you for that. I mean, this is our story, right? And so part of this is pulling all the pieces of the story together and reminding each other and reminding those of us who weren't there what all of those experiences were about. So thank you for that. Okay, moving on. So what I want to talk about next is a little more sort of in-depth reflection on George Floyd's murder, May 25th, 2020, and the ripple effects that has had on the world and also Mayflower. So we know about this event. We know it happened very close to our spiritual home, and we know that it has brought about this reckoning. Go ahead, Maureen. So I mentioned this, that there were many of us in the congregation that were led to really just sort of tackle those questions in a little bit more depth about how is it that some people experience the world relatively easily and supported and all those things, and some people systemically just have barriers in their way all the time. And so we brought Jody Farr brought her books to our congregation, and we had some opportunity to have some really amazing conversation that I think opened up a lot of new thinking for many of us, that especially for me as a white person, right, the ways in that I have just lived and engaged in the world that I took for granted, those ways of being and understanding, um, through no fault of anyone's, those ways of being have caused great harm to other people who are not part of those dominant normalized groups, particularly people of color, and others, members of the LGBTQIA plus communities, etc. And and go ahead, Maureen, as part of this, time of reckoning and these ways of being sort of being questioned by everyone, there are specific institutions, it feels like, that are really getting talked about quite a bit. And if we look at, and we hear about those gaps that exist between primarily people of color and white people, that are quite wide in Minnesota, especially. If you look at healthcare, if you look at employment, education, I mean, all of these demographics that we sort of track. Minnesota is a phenomenal place to live if you're a white person, and if you're a person of color, you're not experiencing those same kinds of positive relationships with institutions and with groups. So this has been an opportunity for us to really consider how do we represent people who are different from us? What are those issues of power and control? And the next slide. That has led to these big conversations about, what do we commemorate in terms of our history and our narratives and our values, and which commemorations need to be challenged. So obviously at the time of George Floyd's murder, there was a lot of questions and protests around particularly Confederate markers and monuments, and thinking about what are we commemorating, right? When we make a monument or a marker, what are we commemorating? And there's a difference, right? So some of those markers were created right after the Civil War, for example. They're often found in cemeteries to honor those who lost their lives in that battle. But we noticed, and we're learning, that many of the big statues and the ones that were erected in front of courthouses and in parks and in public spaces were actually built generations after, for example, the Civil War, and that there was some intentionality behind, white supremacy. We're talking about white nationalism, right? That there was some that it was intentionally placed in particular places, and during times when, for example, African American rights were being fought for a little more publicly, we would see these backlashes and these commemorations. So that's part of the conversation, right? Because we are thinking about our own name and our own symbols and what we commemorate that way. So before we go there, I want to bring up one more kind of big picture piece. And that is this idea of intention versus impact. So if we think about intention, right, that has to do with what motivates us to do any particular thing, right? Those things that cause our actions. And that is different from our impact, which is how our actions are received by others. So go ahead, Maureen. I'm going to show you some difficult symbols. If we think about those Confederate markers, and we think about symbols such as the Nazi swastika, and this is the KKK insignia. We know some symbols and monuments and markers were intended to cause harm or fear or oppression or intimidation, right? And the impact followed. However, we'll go to the next one. There are other symbols that did not have a direct intention to harm people, right? If we look at these examples, these are all sports insignias. So we have the Cleveland baseball team that is now the Guardians. See if I remember these. The Washington football team, who's now the Commanders, something like that. And then right down the street from Mayflower Southwest High School until 1987, their mascot was the Indian. And then they changed it to the Lakers. So these symbols certainly were not intended to harm. They were meant to be, right, even symbols of pride and progress and sports athletic prowess, whatever. But they're quite hurtful and harmful. And in some cases, it took a long time for those conversations to come to a place of understanding that the impact was so harmful that it needed to change. So this is getting us, go ahead, Maureen, a little closer to home, right? If we think about now the kind of the Mayflower and the Thanksgiving story, again, we don't see that anyone has harmful intentions when we talk about those stories, and there's even pride in the stories, right, about the Pilgrims and their bravery and their willingness to leave their homeland and take this journey to who knows where, right, and bring religious freedom and work together, right, to survive in this new world. There's a lot of positive things there. However, we know also that the impact of those settlers in these lands was not positive for everyone, that there was death and destruction and a whole way of life and culture that was destroyed. So go ahead, Maureen, that's kind of the next one too. So it's not our intention to harm others when we have these names, these stories that we tell, and yet we have to sort of think through what the impact is. So next one, Maureen. So this has kind of been the question, right, is how do we navigate that intent of the Mayflower travelers who became settlers when the impact of that settlement meant death for indigenous tribes and destruction of their way of life? Kind of a big question, kind of a heavy one. All right, next one. So that question, from my understanding, right, has been one that has sort of bubbled up from time to time at Mayflower, and there hasn't been sort of a systemic congregation-wide attempt to just sit down and talk about it. Let's really talk through who we are, who we want to become, and figure out if the name Mayflower and our symbols is in line with what we're saying. And there's no, speak as the facilitator of the committee, right? There's no decision that has been made. There is just a genuine love for this community and a deep desire and an attempt to get us to talk through it and decide what this congregation is going to do together. So we have this amazing time now, another year before our 100th anniversary. And it is an amazing chance for us to talk through who have we been, who do we say we are, and who do we want to become for the next 100 years? What will be our impact? So question, that was a lot to throw again. Take a breath before we get into the next part. As Sarah would say, more coffee, always. Okay, so now let's take a look at some of the documents that we have created as a congregation, and kind of remind ourselves what these are and what we have said we are about as we think about this big question. So I believe it was November 2022 when these documents were voted on at the congregational meeting and approved. So that's what I have here on our screen. And I just wanted to take a couple of snippets, again, as a way of kind of grounding us in who we say we are. This is the vision, and I'll read it out loud. It says that our vision is to be a progressive Christian community of faith, actively seeking God's dream of justice on earth. We cultivate a spiritual commitment to God, each other, and the broader community to operate with deep integrity as members of a diverse world. And I'm just going to read these and not really make too much comment on it, but just reminding us of our documents. Our mission statement says this, that we will inspire a collective and personal journey along the Jesus path, moving us toward justice through communion with God and discerned action. To enact that vision and mission, we have 4 sort of strategic plan pieces. The first is to heal our souls from the pandemic, journey the Jesus path, express radical hospitality, and live God's dream of justice. And although all 4 of those are amazing, we're not going to read through all of them. But I just want to highlight the live God's dream of justice, and that what we have done in our strategic plan is to think about how that will look within our congregation, among our members, and then beyond our walls. So these are the 2 bullet points in the within part of living God's dream of justice, and I'll just read them quick. We will seek to understand injustice, then confess and redress our contributions to it. We will open our hearts and minds to personal and collective transformation and renewal. In the among category, there's quite a bit here. So I'll summarize. I will continue to work in all of our racial and social justice, climate justice concerns. We will make reparations for the injustices of slavery and systemic racism and the ongoing land theft from Indigenous communities. We will fulfill our call to compassionate service through prayer, political and social action, and presence with those in need. We will help Mayflower to hear God's still speaking voice and to respond to emerging prophetic calls for justice. And the last piece, the beyond piece. We will organize and take powerful, effective, and concrete action to bring God's dream of justice to fruition. We will live out the calling of an urban congregation by connecting with our diverse neighbors. We will actively seek to repair the damage to the earth and creation and oppose white supremacy in all of its manifestations. So some pretty intense, beautiful language there that, again, it just is going to have to sit right in our heads and our hearts as we, again, think about intention versus impact. Think about whether we change the name or not, right? There's going to be big work to do. So we can't ignore one side or the other. We've got to be thinking about all of it, no matter what the decision is. And just that next one, Maureen, we do have this, why now? We have this sort of amazing time of reflection Council has created, this 2-year sort of time of reflection and discernment for us to really, really sit down and dig in and think about who we are and who we want to be. Okay, so that brings us to the now times. And last May at the congregational meeting, the council created this committee that's called What's in a Name, the What's in a Name Committee. We have been given a 2-year charge to consider this question. And here's the question for you. I'll read it out loud. As we begin the next century, does the name Mayflower Community Congregational United Church of Christ continue to reflect our identity, mission, and vision as a church? So that's the big essential question. Council has given us 6 specific tasks. They are here. And, primarily we've been focusing on number 1, which is to create opportunities for the congregation to have deep discussions about all of these issues. And then a lot of the other work has been going on behind the scenes. I'll talk about in a minute, sort of seeking out other congregations and organizations who have been going or considering a name change. Think about that. To expressly, figure out what the monetary costs and non-monetary costs would be involved if that decision is made. To develop a system of preserving the history of Mayflower and our symbols with integrity, to report these findings to council and congregation along the way, and to continue to create the process and timeline, because this is it's new for everybody. So as the metaphor is about building the plane as you fly, right? We've become very good builders and welders at 30,000 feet. So far, so good. We haven't lost anybody out the door. No, what was it? Blown plug? No blown plugs on this plane. All right, so I'll talk a little bit about sort of the last year, and then we'll talk about kind of where we are now and where we're headed as a committee. Our first many months was, again, just to bring the question in front of the congregation and get some initial reactions. So I think the question was very simple. Like, what are some reasons why we would consider changing the name, and what are some reasons why we would not consider the change? And I'll show you those themes in a minute. But we had several months, lots of meetings with particular small groups who wanted to do it together as a group. Other times just offered after church services. We recorded all the comments, everything that was said. And we know we got to well over 100 people, maybe even 150, although some of us were there multiple times, indeed. After those sessions happened, then the committee sat down and we collated, right, all of that information, and looked at it and sort of coalesced things into some themes. And again, I'll show you the themes in a minute. And then we came back to the congregation with those themes and we said, here's the big picture. Here's what we heard from those initial sessions. What do you think about this? And we had a good chunk of people show up on that day as well, over 60 members in the 2 sessions. Got a chance to hear about the themes. We then presented the themes. Both the committee has been in conversation with council and attending council meetings, as well as the congregational meeting in November, where kind of like now, I did a little bit of a, here's what the committee's been up to presentation. And then we presented what ended up being 10 themes, 5 reasons why we would change the name, 5 reasons why we would not. And we asked the people who were at the congregational meeting to take a little sticky dot and just put it somewhere. Which of these 10 themes is the one you think, is most important or speaks the most to you, or the one you think we really need to think through and address first. So it was a little bit of a forced choice activity, right? Just so we could kind of take the pulse of how are people feeling. And that's the next slide. And I'm sure this is hard to see. I apologize about that. But these were the 5 themes why we thought we would change the name or should change the name. And the first reason has to do with the legacy of the name and the symbolism and the fact that it's problematic. And we should think about that. So 12 people put their sticky dots there. The second theme was about reaffirming our mission as a church, right? To love God and our neighbors. So 9 people put their sticky dot there. The third reason was about sort of reaffirming our vision and mission for the next 100 years, and then using that as a way to attract, right, new energy and members. So 12 people put their sticky dot there. The fourth had to do with continuing our leadership in the national UCC and using this as a witness for others. No people put their sticky dots there. Doesn't mean it's not important, just no sticky dots. And the last theme on that side was that the name, we should clarify our denominational affiliation, delete congregational, and only keep UCC. So 2 people thought that was the most important. On the other side, reasons why we would not change the name. The first theme had to do with a feeling that just the generational love and commitment to the community, that what has been built here is based more on religious freedom, and it's about being brave, and being a community together. So 5 people put their sticky dots there. Second theme was a concern that by changing the name, we would think that our racial work was done, and that we shouldn't change the name before we do the hard work there. So that was 2
I have a question.
Sure.
Can you email this document to all the attendees in this session?
Absolutely. And Joe, I believe it's already posted on our website.
Okay.
But yes, we're going to post this recording on the website, and then I'll make sure that the important what's in a name documents are there, but I believe it's already there.
Good. Thank you.
You are welcome. Okay, third theme was,
Could I ask a quick question?
hi,
So
Dwight.
each person got 1 dot, so
Yeah.
that you couldn't put a name for you couldn't put a dot on the reason we should and on another reason that you should not.
Right. We just
Okay.
wanted to take the pulse. What's the most important?
Okay.
Boom. We'll get back to that question in a minute, because we're not done. We're not done.
Okay.
All right. So the third one was about worrying that we would lose members. No one put their dot there. The fourth theme was about losing our sort of name recognition. 4 people put their dots there. And the last one was about the practical and logistical considerations of a name change, that it's costly and time consuming. So 1 person put their dot there. So disclaimer for sure, this was 46 people at 1 congregational meeting. But we as a committee feel like we need to continue to just give people the chance to use their voices, or their sticky dots, right? But on this day, here's what, the people who were there had to say. And it's just part of the conversation.
And Kate, if I can interrupt a sec,
Yes.
the wording on these, the committee formulated the wording.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, correct.
Yeah.
So we coalesced things, and we
Yeah,
looked at things, and we wordsmithed, and we wanted to make sure there was, some balance,
Yeah.
things felt balanced and represented,
Yeah.
but that we got at the big concerns.
Good to know.
All right, so that brings us to last week and today, right? So the hope is that by providing this information, again, it's an opportunity for people to kind of dig in if you haven't been able to be part of the conversation. And, many of us have had lots of things going on post-COVID. So we want to make sure that we are trying to reach out to as many people as we can, engage as many people as we can in the conversation, get questions answered, right? So that everybody feels like they've had a place and a voice in the process. All right, and then so moving forward from here for the next couple of months, we have some exciting things planned. Next weekend, tomorrow, right? It's already tomorrow. Reverend Jim Bear Jacobs will be with us, and he is going to preach at both services, and he is going to take time during educational hour in between to just continue this conversation from his theological and cultural perspective about what we're up to. So super excited about that. And then next month we have Mary Keepers here with us. She's in the process of weaving together all of I can only imagine the beautiful stories and words that were turned in, right? So Mary, I know for you it's a labor of love, but it's a big one. And we will have our Readers Theater on March 17th. So thank you for that.
Say that I have well over 40 stories.
Wonderful.
And a lot more words than are in those 2 columns.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we need to talk about the content and the time constraint and all that, which
absolutely
we can do down the line. But
gotcha. Thank you.
It's very enlightening, I will tell you.
I can only imagine.
Pretty incredible.
Yes. Great. Okay, so I've got kind of one more piece I want to hit on, and then we can take questions and things. So the committee has been doing some of this internal work and trying to get congregation to have as many conversations as we can. And then we've also been trying to reach out to other congregations and organizations about this whole sort of name change issue. Wow, we didn't hear, it was really hard to get people to even respond to a simple question. We didn't get anybody really that was interested in talking with us until very recently. But just want to sort of highlight that while this is an incredibly big and important question, it's one that other congregations don't appear to be ready to take up yet. So Mayflower is continuing to sort of show its leadership in that area. However, there are three things that I want to highlight that the committee has learned relatively, recently that's informing our thinking as well. One is that the former Mayflower Early Childhood Center did go through a process of considering a name change. The concern was brought up by their parents and families. And they did work for a year or more around that issue for them, and they have decided to change their name to Creekside Montessori. So that happened this school year. And I pulled out, there was an article in the Southwest Journal, I think. Maureen, if you want to go to the next one, I just pulled out a couple of quotes from their leaders. This is head of school Ann Estes, who said, "If the name Mayflower is hurtful to anyone, why would we want to keep it? That's not who we are, who we want to be represented. Montessori education is peace education. Creekside well suits this identity." And the next quote, just that this sprung from a desire to more fully reflect our values of belonging and inclusion and recognizing the historical trauma associated with the name Mayflower. Creekside families initiated the name change process during the 2021 year. They went through 2 years, committee meetings, committee brainstorming, consultation with an anti-bias educational partner called AmazeWorks, and they made the name change for this year. So we thought that was interesting, close to home. We also reached out to former Colonial Edina Church, Congregational Church, that has very recently changed their name to Meeting House Church. We haven't had any deep conversation with Meeting House people or staff. We're still hoping that will happen at some point. But they sent some documents and we were able to kind of see what their process was about. So that first slide was sort of their essential question. Thanks, Maureen. How shall we show up in the world? And then they used the Micah verse. What does God require of you but to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with God, was sort of their vision, mission. And then they went deeply into those pieces to talk about how that shows up in their congregation. And then their conclusion is the next slide. These were their words. The validity of these questions seems clear. Why would a Church of Christ followers committed to doing good in the world identify themselves with a name that is associated with such a troubling history? If nothing else, choosing a new name allows us the opportunity to more authentically embrace who we want to be and to make this clear to those around us, especially those to whom we want to reach out with the good news of God's love. So it felt like some of their pieces felt familiar to us. However, the next slide, they used a kind of a straight Robert's Rules voting procedure. And in fact, it felt like their leadership team had already made the decision to make the name change and then sort of encouraged the congregation to take that on. And the first vote, in fact, ended up being a no. So the congregation voted not to change the name. They went back, they did some more work, and the second vote then was a yes. But that has given us, as a committee, quite a few things to think about, just in terms of making sure we're putting together as robust and transparent and respectful and generous a process as we can, so that again, everyone is feeling as though they are able to think through all of these concerns talk with each other, voice their ideas and concerns and thoughts and opinions, and we'll all be moving together is our hope. So we also then recently had some conversations with Doug Faderhart from Living Table Church. And if you know the story of Living Table, they were, it's the old Spirit of the Lakes UCC, that initially they were just sharing space with Minnehaha UCC. And then they engaged in a discernment process and decided, in fact, to merge the two congregations. So that happened quite a few years ago. And now they are in relationship actually with, I think, a Lutheran congregation and maybe another congregation that are, again, just, St. Stephen's Catholic community, sharing space. But again, just starting kind of the conversations amongst themselves about, what it means to share space and be religious communities together. So Doug was very generous with his time and kind of shared these small group discernment discussion circles that they do, and that they felt was really a positive way to tackle big issues like this. And so we're hopeful. And again, council will decide the next steps in the process. But the committee is feeling like we will recommend that at some point when we're ready to enter into more of a decision-making process, that we use one of consensus building and discernment and not a Robert's Rule of Order vote. So I'll be bringing that committee recommendation to council at their next meeting, and we'll see if that recommendation moves forward. And then just so kind of this final piece about discernment. I'm very excited that the Lenten team has sort of taken up discernment as a process. And so if you're in a Lenten small group, you're going to get the chance to think about what that word discernment means. And certainly as a congregation, as a community of faith, we're always going to have big things to talk about and think about and make decisions about. So, thinking about discernment now is going to be a skill that we'll have in our congregation for a long time, which is exciting. But then the committee would love to put those skills to some use this spring yet. Where did you go to this one? As you know, we saw with those 10 themes, and to Mary's piece about what's coming up in the stories about the name, people need more opportunities to really think through all of this. As you know, whether we vote to change the name or we don't, there are big things that we're going to need to, talk through and make decisions about. So I believe we have the date now, right? April 7th. We are going to invite the congregation to come for a very special, maybe 2-hour session in the afternoon, where we will bring forward kind of some essential questions based on those big themes, and give people an opportunity to sit in small groups and talk with one another. And it's a little bit of a jigsaw. We'll continue to kind of change tables and talk through some of these really big questions. So we're excited for that. So look for that information coming shortly in April. And then, as we say, we'll be in conversation with council about the next steps, and we'll have our recommendations for them. And as we say, we're building it, and when we're ready, if we're ready in May, hopefully to again come together, and if not, make a decision, take another pulse or something. But it'll be another opportunity for us to gather as a group and think about where we are. And then the last piece here, we're also very excited about. Reverend Jim Bear Jacobs facilitates these sacred sites tours. I know they've been highlighted in a lot of the UCC communications that are out there. They're fabulous tours from what I hear. I know some of us have already been on one. It took us like 2 years to get a date, but we finally have one, June 16th. I think we've got 50 spots reserved for Mayflower people to go and to really again, think about those land questions. Think about Bedote, you know, where the Minnesota and Mississippi rivers meet, and the historical importance and significance for our indigenous neighbors. So excited for all of that. And then I promised Jim I would give a shout out to the Lenten group. So here it is. If you have time and energy and want to join a Lenten group, we've got quite a few things starting this week. So that's exciting as well. Whew, a lot of information. Any other questions or concerns? Okay, this is not the end, right? This is the next step. Thank you so much for being here and for your thoughts and your energy. And yeah, please do join a Lenten circle, and please do come tomorrow. I keep thinking it's next week, tomorrow, to hear some more good stuff. And we'll look forward to continuing the conversation.
And I echo what was said about your work. It's an enormous amount of work that the committee has put in.
An amazing committee, yeah.
Very thoughtful
Thank you.
work.
And lots of support from council, so it's been great.
Appreciate it. Yeah, great.
Yes.
Thank you.
You bet.
Kate.
Have a great Saturday. We'll see you tomorrow. Take care.
Bye.